In this lecture, we're going to take a look at threading in the async task. In the previous lecture, we looked at network, and we realized that networking requires multiple threading. And I didn't explain it well because we were getting towards the end of the video, and I wanted to focus that video on networking. Let's take a look at what I mean by threading. What we're doing here is I've just told the fetch method to run. And what's going to happen is this is on the UI thread. Notice that while the debugger is holding up the UI thread, we're getting no interaction on the UI thread. Now watch what happens. I made a quick and dirty thread in the last video without truly explaining it. What I can do is I can tell this thread to start. Watch something very interesting. I press Control M, and you're going to see this window here over in debug that has thread 1 and has our current breakpoint set and a lot of blue lines here. Then we see other threads. As luck would have it, in the Android operating system and in Eclipse, you can actually watch different threads run. Now, watch something very interesting. The UI thread is still locked up, okay? Watch what happens when I tell this other thread to start, okay? I say start, now watch. Over here in this threads view, you probably had no idea what this was before, right? Now we actually have two threads that are debugging. We actually have two different threads that we can debug, and we can watch them both operate simultaneously, okay? If I click on this thread, suddenly I'm in the networking thread. I can choose F5, and I can step through this thread. Okay, it's a separate process running. As a matter of fact, I am going to step through it just a little bit, but I'm going to hold it right here. I'm going to hold it right here. Now, I can go back to the UI thread, totally separate set of breakpoints, and tell it to go ahead and play and finish up. As soon as I do that, the UI is going to come back and be responsive again. Notice this, the UI is back and it's responsive. I don't have anything displaying right now, but I could do something like go to the previous screen. I can interact, and see, here we go. I can interact with the phone. Meanwhile, my network thread is still running totally separately. Okay, so now my network thread is still running, yet my UI is still operational. Okay, network thread still running, UI still operational, and that's the advantage of having multiple threads. Okay, right now it's doing a network call. The disadvantage is that when these separate threads start, we have to have a way for one thread to communicate back to another, and this is a bit challenging in general. But Android has made something, I'm going to go ahead and play this. Android has made something that makes our lives a little bit easier here, and that's called Async Task. Async Task allows us to start an asynchronous thread and then allows that asynchronous thread to come back when it's finished and communicate with the user interface. It's a little bit tricky to set up, but it's easier than the alternative, I'll tell you that. To set up an async task, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to this plant results activity, or I'm going to go to the online plant DAO. I am going to remove all the threading stuff I put in earlier. Okay, we're going to refactor. Okay, we're going to take this back to how it used to be. Now, if I were to run this right now, okay, we'll say make the network call. If I were to run this right now, my application would crash because I'm not running it in multiple threads. But we're going to wire up these multiple threads in this thing called Async Task. Okay, we're going to wire up the multiple threads in a thing called Async Task. By the way, every time I Control M, I notice the screen capture software freezes for 5 seconds. So if you detect any pauses, usually when I hit Control M, I wait for about 5 seconds before I start talking again. In any case, here we go. Back to Java View. Okay, and I'm going to click on the plant results activity. Okay, and I will Control M this. For an async task, what we need to do is make an inner class usually. We need to make an inner class, which is a class within a class. That sounds really weird, but that's what we do. I put my cursor to the right of the open curly that starts the class. I hold Control-Shift-P in Eclipse. That will show me the corresponding close curly. Now what I do is I say class plant search task extends async task. Now something else weird, we have to use generic identifiers. We have to tell it here what's getting passed in. We'll say in this case we can say a plant. We have to give it an integer, which is basically a status notifier. And then we have to say what we're expecting back from this thread, which is going to be an array. Well, let's just say a list. We could just say a list. A list of plant objects. Okay, that's what we call a generic identifier. Open curly and then close curly. Control-Shift-O, organize imports. Okay, what doesn't it like about that now? Okay, it's telling us that we have to inherit an abstract method. I choose add unimplemented methods. Now, do you see the value of these generics? These generic terms told me for this method do in background, it told me what my incoming parameter type is and what the return type is. Once it knew that, it could give me this method. Okay? Now in that method, that's where I'm going to do the networking stuff. So I'm going to take this, get access to our DAO. Let's see, I'm going to take a whole bunch of this, honestly. I'm going to take most of this, and we're going to move it into, let's take the whole thing. I'm going to take all this stuff from onCreate, Control-X, and we're going to move most of it to do in background. Some of it we're going to refactor a bit. Okay, boom. And there we go. Okay. What I might do, though, up there, yeah, that some of it, okay, I'm going to need to do a little bit of advanced refactoring here. I'm going to take this part, and let me explain what I'm doing. I'm going to take this part where we are fetching the search term that was passed in. Okay, I'm going to keep that in onCreate. I'm going to keep the construction of the plant in onCreate. Okay, so that's good so far. Okay, now, do in background. Let me put a java comment here. This is the stuff that will run in its own thread. It's important to put the networking logic here. Now, what happens when this thread finishes? When this thread finishes, it's going to automatically invoke a method called onPostExecute. I type onP, control space, and onPostExecute will invoke. Now take a look. This parameter matches this return type, which matches this generic argument. That's very much intentional. So this is the stuff that runs in its own thread. This is what it calls when it finishes running that in its own thread. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the logic here that wires up our results with our list activity and paste it here. Paste it here inside this onPostExecute. Done a lot of copy and pasting now, and I'm going to need to synchronize some names. I'm going to need to synchronize a few names. First of all, list plant result is the same thing as what we used to call all plants. I can change this name, that's fine. I can change this to all plants, and I can change this to all plants. Okay, now it's redlining. Okay, I have to do something tricky with the first parameter. I have to use our class name, which is plant results activity, and put that before this. Plant results activity. This, and that's only because we're in an inner class. It's a little bit of Android trickiness there. Okay, now that compiles without issue. Secondly, you see plant .. arg o. I'm going to turn that to search plant, and then down here we're going to say search plant 0. Reason being, I could actually send in multiple plants, so I have to treat this like an array. Wow, deep breath, as we did quite a bit there. I'm going to remove this for the moment. That's really ugly. We'll come back and fix that later. Okay, doing background. Must return a type of, okay, right, and then return. Okay, a little more refactoring, and then I'm going to explain what I'm doing. Control C, Control V, boom. Actually, no, we'll leave that. Okay, and boom. Return all plants. Okay, and then down here we're going to say return new array list plant. Boom. Okay, wow. Control Shift O, organize imports. Okay, now let me explain what we did. We had to do some massive surgery on this class. Luckily with Git, you can do a diff, a before and after, and see what changed. Okay, the onCreate method is going to get called first. The onCreate method is going to get called first. What we're going to do in onCreate is we're going to look for the search term that was passed into this class from the previous class. Or in other words, passed into this activity from the previous activity. Or in other words, what was passed into the results activity where we are now from the search activity. We're going to get that search text. We're going to take that search text, we're going to create a new plant object, and we're going to add that search text to the common name. Okay, now one more thing we want to do, we're going to say create an object of our async task. Okay, we're going to say plant search task pst equals new plant search task. Okay, and then we're going to say pst.execute, and we're going to pass in our plant search plant. Okay, and I'm going to say run the plant search task in a new thread. Okay, so what's going to happen? Create an object of our async task, run the plant search task in a new thread. There we go. Save. Okay, now what that's going to do is that's going to tell this method do in background to operate in its own thread. Since it's running in its own thread, we can create our online DAO, our online plant DAO, which is going to, and let me add some comments here, get access to our DAO, which will perform network operations. This is going to give us access to our plant DAO, which is going to make a network call. The network call happens here on the fetch method. We have to pass in a plant object, and the plant object is the one we created up here. Okay, we created and populated with a common name. Down here, you'll notice that we're accepting a plant object, but we have an interesting construction. We have plant and then an ellipsis that follows, plant and an ellipsis. What that means is that we can accept one plant or multiple plants as objects. If we're accepting one, we just note it with square bracket 0 close square bracket. Now we call the plant DAO fetch as we've done before, and we're going to get back a list of all plants. We haven't done a Json parse of this yet, so right now it's going to be empty. We return that. In case there was an exception, we're just going to return an empty list. But where does it get returned? It gets returned to onPost execute. What's important is that onPost execute is invoked when do in background thread completes. onPost execute executes on the UI thread, so it can interact with UI elements and update UI elements. and that's important. Okay. This thread, doing background, does not run on the UI thread and thus cannot directly access UI components. Okay, so the onPost execute is going to get called when the do in background thread completes. What it's going to do is it's going to receive the results. Okay, it's going to put that into an array adapter. Okay, and then it's going to display that array adapter with setListAdapter. Wow, again, lots of stuff going on, and even with all this, we're not currently parsing the JSON. So even with all this, we don't yet have results. We'll cover that in our next video. Let me go ahead and save. Control M to bring me back to windowed mode. Control M brings me back to windowed mode. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say debug. Naturally, this might take a few moments, so I'll go ahead and pause the recording as we wait for the emulator to come up. And the emulator's up, so let's watch very closely. Plant name, redbud. And search. Okay. Yes. As we're stepping through, I'll tell you what thread we're on and what we're doing. Okay, plant results activity on create is on the UI thread. Okay, and let's look what's going on. We F6, let's watch very closely. Plant search text is going to give us the text redbud. Search plant set common name, going to set redbud. Create our plant search task, and then invoke execute. Right now, before I invoke execute, notice there's only one thread up in debug that currently has a breakpoint running. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and choose F6 on execute. Notice that this thread just jumps to the close curly. This thread is still debuggable. Meanwhile, if we go down, we see a separate thread has now started. The separate thread is our do in background. So what I can do now is step through this separate thread one line at a time. Okay, F6. Oop. Looks like I might have made it a little bit mad. I think I F6'd a little too quickly there. Looks like we're good. Again, we're still in a separate thread. Now watch this. Just for SMGs, as we used to say back in the 90s, I can go ahead and play this UI thread. And as soon as I do that, my UI becomes responsive again. Okay, my UI becomes responsive again as all of the networking stuff happens in a separate thread. F5, F6, I'm in the network thread still, F5 again. And now watch as we safely, knock on wood, here's where the network call happens, we're safely making a network call while the UI is still active and responsive. Okay? For some reason, it looks like that call is happening twice. Not sure why about that. Control, I might have slipped and hit a rewind button there. F6, and there we go. We get our result back. Result goes back to the do in background method. Okay, and we know right now we're not actually parsing anything, so it goes right to the do in background method, which is just going to return an empty list of plants. Okay. And with this, that's going to finish up thread number 14 here. That's going to finish up thread number 14, which is our background networking thread. I'll go ahead and choose play. What's interesting is the next breakpoint is back on thread 1, the UI thread, because we're coming back to onPost execute. We're getting the collection of results that we got from the networking thread, which incidentally is an empty list. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back and update the UI with what is essentially an empty list. So that's a quick look into Async Task. The next thing we want to do is look at Json parsing and see how we can wire up Json parsing to actually get some results. So what we saw here, quick review of what we saw here. We saw that Async Task is an inner class, which is a class within a class. So we have to be really careful about our curlies. When we define an async task, we define 3 parameters. What's getting passed in, which is a plant, a parameter where we can report back progress if we want to do an hourglass or something like that, and then a parameter that indicates what the thread is going to be returning. We must override this method, do in background, which is our thread method. It's going to return the same thing as this generic identifier here. Those are going to be one and the same. It's going to accept a collection of this generic identifier, which is getting passed in. If we want to access only the first one, we use square brackets and 0. We do any of our thread-based activities here in this do in background method, and when it is finished, it returns something of this type, either here or here. When it returns, onPostExecute is invoked, and onPostExecute will step through these lines back on the UI thread. So that's important. The UI thread is invoked again in onPostExecute, and that will update our user interface. So we have 2 different threads happening at once here. We have a UI thread and a non-UI thread, both occurring at the same time. And we know that by using the debugger, we can look at each thread and watch what each thread is doing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording. I'm going to commit what I have to GitHub, and then we'll do one more recording on JSON parsing, and then we'll wrap it up for the week. Thank you.